All right, joining us now, the author of now a bestseller, Get Trump, and it deals with every legal issue the president's facing. Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz is with us, and the author of the soon-to-be-released Trial of the Century, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. I understand, Professor Dershowitz, that you said if the judge issues a gag order, you will file an amicus brief and argue that we citizens are being denied the ability to hear the defendant. He's not only a defendant, Professor, but he's also a presidential candidate. And they did this in the Roger Stone case. I think they might have done it in the Manafort case. I don't fully remember. My question to you is, how does a judge get to take away the right of an American to speak out on their own behalf on a very public case like this?
Tragically, judges have done that. They've done it recently. I was glad to see Joe be optimistic that they're not going to do it in this case. But if they did do it in this case, I would immediately put together some of the great First Amendment lawyers in America as amicus, because we would be the victims. There are two First Amendment rights, the right of the speaker, but the right of the listener, according to Justice Thurgood Marshall, is just as important. But I hope that won't happen, because that would really mean a body blow to the First Amendment. And today you couldn't even count on the American Civil Liberties Union to defend the First Amendment on behalf of Donald Trump, because they would lose all of their funding. You know, the only disagreement I have with Joe, who's a great lawyer, I think he's too much of an optimist. I cannot imagine an elected judge in the borough of Manhattan throwing out this case and having to go to his family and say, I'm the lawyer who freed Donald Trump, or his friends or his business associates. All he has to do is remember what happened to me when I just defended Donald Trump on the Senate, lost all of my friends, clients, business associates, and no judge is going to want to be, quote, Dershowitz. So you're not going to have an opportunity to get a fair assessment of statute of limitations, change of venue. This is a fixed case if it's tried in Manhattan. And in my book,
Professor, well, hold on a second. You're a Harvard professor, and you're basically saying the rule of law does not exist here. You are basically saying, go ahead.
It does not exist for Donald Trump. In my book, Get Trump, I prove that the rule of law has an exemption. There is the rule for everybody else, and there's the rule for Donald Trump, his lawyers, his associates, his family. This from a man who voted against Trump and intends to vote him against him again. Donald Trump wrote to me today as he was getting on the plane. He said, Alan, getting ready to leave for New York, can't really believe it. These maniacs want to destroy our country. So sad. Nothing on Hunter or Biden. Anyway, your words are very important. Save America. P.S. Congrats on the book. Doing very, very well. The thesis of the book is the rule of law does not apply to Donald Trump in the borough of Manhattan. There is no way he gets a fair trial in Manhattan.
And you go through Fulton County, and you go through the special counsel, and you make the case on every one of the charges that are being brought up against him. Let me bring in Greg. Let's talk about a change of venue. Let's talk about the statute of limitations, prosecutorial abuse, selective prosecution. You know, Greg, I look at all these issues. To me, it's all slam dunk. All of these things should throw this case out immediately, but yet that doesn't appear to be happening.
Yeah, but you've identified all the things that lead me to now believe that we don't have a justice system anymore. We only have a legal system, and it appears corrupted. And Americans recognize this. They've lost faith in our legal system. And there's a reason why Trump's polling numbers have suddenly shot up. His campaign coffers are now filled with millions of dollars over the last 3 days, because Americans are very smart people, and they see what's going on. This is a persecution disguised as a prosecution. They recognize that this is a feeble zombie case resurrected from the dead and is purely politically motivated. A whopping 76% in the latest CNN poll say this is politically motivated, and they're right, it is. But there are other reasons that are deeply troubling to Americans and why they don't like this. They see this as a purely personal matter, a relic of a case that happened a great many years ago. And yes, the statute of limitations long ago passed. But most of all, you know, they see this as the same old tired act. It's a replay of the Russia hoax. Government officials, egged on by Democrats, going after a political opponent with vengeance. It was the greatest mass delusion in American political history. And you would think that the government has learned from this, but you've got a local prosecutor who now wants to put on trial the leading opponent of his, Bragg's, political party. And I think in the end, this is going to backfire tremendously.
Let me ask you, Professor, I want to look at this novel legal theory that they're using here, never been used before, where they take a state misdemeanor case where clearly the statute of limitations are way over, was what, 2 years, marry it to a federal election law whose statute of limitations, I would argue, also have passed. Yet they put this together. This has never happened before, but they're doing this to him. Now, keep in mind, this is a prosecutor that in 52% of felony cases reduces those felonies to misdemeanors. This is the only time he's taking a misdemeanor and trying to raise it to the level of a felony. That's why I'd like to see Bragg himself try this case.
Yeah, and I think it's completely ludicrous on its face. And, you know, I think it will face motions to dismiss, not just on the statute of limitations, but the argument that the law doesn't support this kind of a charge and the alleged facts don't support a crime. So, you know, I would like to see a honest judge, objective and neutral, look at these motions to dismiss seriously and sincerely. I slightly disagree with the professor. I do think that most judges do not want to be and are fearful of being overturned by a higher court. And I hope that gives this particular judge pause when he considers the motions to dismiss.
Same question, Professor.
In this case, a judge would rather be reversed on appeal than have to come home and look his wife and family in the eye and say, I let Trump out. Also, the appellate court judges are elected. This is going to be a very hard case in which to get justice. Look, the statute of limitations issue is so clear. They could have indicted him any time in the last 6 years. They say, no, he was out of the state. But when did they indict him? They indicted him when he was out of the state in Florida. What's the difference? The virtue of a statute of limitations argument is that might be appealable right away, whereas these other arguments about selective prosecution, about whether or not the statute really covers this, you have to wait for a conviction to appeal those. So there's some virtue in making change of venue, statute of limitations arguments that are appealable. In terms of the basic case, there's no misdemeanor here. Let me explain why there's no misdemeanor. So there was a payment made. The payment was made to prevent information from coming out to his wife and family and business associates about an alleged affair. And Bragg is saying once he paid the money to keep everything quiet, he should have listed it on his corporate form as hush money paid to a former porn star. Never in the history of the world has anybody ever paid hush money and then put it on a public forum. It's always disguised. Never in history has anybody
ever disguised because legally it's a non-disclosure agreement. You're not even allowed to talk about it publicly.
But remember, this is
and the other aspect of it, the falsifying of business records is allegedly a fraud, according to Bragg. Well, who has he defrauded? His own business? So this is utter nonsense. And the predicate crime of the misdemeanor expired 5 years ago. I just don't see how you get there if you're Alvin Bragg.
I got to leave you both here. All right, go ahead, Professor, finish.
Don't expect justice in this case. Don't expect it. It's not going to happen. Maybe when it gets to the Supreme Court, but not in the borough of Manhattan. I love Manhattan. I spend time in Manhattan, but I would not
agree with you,
want to
Professor. He can't get a fair trial. They need to have a change of venue, and I don't believe that motion will succeed. And I wish I was wrong. Thank you both. Alan Dershowitz, Greg Jarrett.